There is a very, very high chance I start the Atlas Invasion League with this build, an explosive arrow, Ballista, Scion. So I actually ran this in Gauntlet as my final character, which I was trying to do a level 78 Shaper on, and it was probably the fastest character I played in the Gauntlet, but I ran that as a Hierophant, and it's actually a really popular spec on a Hierophant from the SSF Hardcore ladder. Now, the footage you're seeing is as a Hyro, but that's just because I don't have a Scion. The big question then is, why go Ascendant? The biggest thing for me is that Hierophant doesn't get Uberlap. I mean, you get to complete it, but when you finish it, you get these. Ascendant, on the other hand, gets better recovery, better QOL from Pathfinder, and probably better damage, honestly. And the one thing you're losing is placement speed. Hyro gets a ton more totem placement speed, and that does make mapping feel slightly better, but there are options simply to path into placement speed, and I think honestly that placement speed is super overkill for Ballistas on Hyro. As far as defenses goes, this is probably the most meta type of defense. I'm running Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner, and Skitterbots. Skitterbots is a bit underrated. You have no other sources of chill, and I think chill is really, really great. These defenses alone are far more than enough to get you through hardcore bossing. Offensively, aside from my explosive arrow setup, I'm also running a Frenzy with Hex Touch and Flammability, and if I can get +1 curse say on my chest, then I'll also go for a Elemental Weakness on hit. And then I have a Hydrosphere setup, and this actually allows for shotgunning from Explosive Arrow. Remember, we're hit based, not ignite based, so shotgunning really, really helps out. I also link my Hydrosphere with Culling Strike. This can also go on your Frenzy, it's up to you. But basically at the end of day 1 or partway through day 2 on a hardcore SSF league, I'd be expecting to hit about 1.5 mil DPS and have about 6.5k HP with all those defenses. Now there's 3 core uniques, and one of them I haven't even included. Rain of Splinters is a really great geo. It lets you drop lesser multiple projectiles in your main setup and lets you run an actual damage support. It's a bit rare, but there's a lot of bosses that are spawning in the Atlas Invasion League, and they're all guaranteed to drop unique. Additionally, if you're playing trade, just buy this. The second is a Skirmish Quiver. This is a very common unique, and it gives you +1 totem. The last one is Lionized Glare. This isn't very conventional, but Far Shot is really great. Again, we're not ignite, we're hit based. And that 60% is really great with Ballistas. What I've noticed when I'm playing Ballistas is that point blank is basically unusable. A lot of bosses move away from you, and a lot of the times you're placing totems quite far away from the bosses. Bar Shot gets a lot more value than Point Blank in my opinion, but I guess it could depend on how you play. Later on, this gets swapped out for the Fledgling. I'm not probably going to do that much heist. Given that I'm playing in the Hardcore Trade League for the upcoming event, I'm not really sure this is going to exist anyway. Now maybe someone will run it. Maybe one of you guys will run heist. If you do, get me this. But after Endless Heist, I don't have my hopes real high. The biggest question for this build is usually around leveling. Now most people starting with Templar and Hyro will tend to go with Armageddon Brand, so they'll go Orb of Storms with Stormblast Mine, and then they'll go Armageddon Brand at 28 with Cremation and Desecrate. On an Ascendant, I don't think that's correct. I prefer to go for a physical steel skill setup going to level 12, and then at level 12 I end up using Spectral Helix. You take some Fizz nodes, but really with Spectral Helix and steel skills you don't need that much damage. Those skills are so broken, they're way too strong. At level 28 however, you can actually do the switch to Explosive Arrow, although you'll need to run Library for this. And you have probably the most important piece of this build, which is Elemental Equilibrium. It lets you auto-apply exposure, and this feels really great. I was worried about the damage early on, but what you end up doing is run an Explosive Arrow setup with Mirage Archer as a primary clearing setup, and then you only use Ballistas for bossing. Now this switches after you get Cruel Up, at which point you can grab the Marauder, and you'll have enough nodes to get your totems surviving a little bit longer. But early on you want to run 2 separate Explosive Arrow setups. I know some of you probably aren't told, but I honestly think this build is at that S tier level, right up there with Seismic Trap and Detonate Dead. I'm not kidding. The biggest thing going for this build compared to those two is actually its clear speed. It's actually faster than both of those builds as you get into maps. Now, in the past, people think totem builds are slow, but my contention is that totem builds are slow not because the builds are slow, but because the players that tend to gravitate towards totem builds are slower players. Anyways, I hope I'll see y'all in a couple hours. I probably will be playing this, but I might do a last second pivot.